Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so our mission today is really to look past just the immediate election results. We want to analyze the bigger shifts happening underneath.
Exactly. We're not just doing the horse race, who won, who lost. We're looking at the strategies, what's actually working with voters, and some really big legal battles brewing.
Right. We've got sources covering the media reactions, a huge Supreme Court case about presidential power and trade, and also how the parties are, well, rigging the game for the future with maps and election security stuff.
Yeah, a lot to unpack. We've pulled from places like the Washington Post, New York Times, Politico, NBC, NPR, ABC News, the usual suspects.
So this dive should give you the key things you need to know, like what arguments are sticking, what's the next big fight in Congress or the court's going to be about.
Let's jump in.
Okay, so first segment, the media takeaways. After the recent elections, what were the sort of recurring themes popping up everywhere?
Well, reading through all the analyses, two things really jumped out consistently. First, the Trump factor, still. The New York Times, Politico, ABC, NBC, NPR, they all basically agreed he remains, let's call it electoral poison for the Republicans overall.
Even with some minority groups that had shifted towards him before.
Even there, yeah.
Yeah.
The drag seems pretty widespread. AP just flat out called the results a referendum on Trump.
Okay, so that's one big theme. What was the second? It always seems to come back to this.
It does. It's the economy. Stupid. Still, AP and NPR really hammered this home. Voters are just incredibly sensitive to prices, the cost of living. That's top of mind.
And did we see that play out with specific candidates?
Absolutely. Candidates who really lunged into that, who hammered on prices, think Zohran Mamdani, Abiel Spanberger, Mikey Sherrill, they seem to do really well. They were talking about what people are feeling at the grocery store.
Okay, but here's where it gets interesting. Based on some polling, the blame for those prices, it seems to be shifting. We saw an Ipsos poll.
Yeah, that poll was striking. It suggests Americans are actually blaming Donald Trump for the current inflation rate. He's, 19 points underwater on that specific question?
19 points. Wow.
Yeah.
And why? Did the poll suggest a reason?
It did. The sources pinpointed it pretty clearly. 58% of Americans think his tariffs are the main reason for price increases. They're seeing them as the scapegoat.
So that connects directly to the cost of living concerns.
Directly. You've got 7 in 10 Americans saying they're spending more on groceries. Food and energy prices are up, 12% over the last year? And that hits working class families the hardest.
Which, ironically, is supposed to be a key part of his base.
Exactly. And you even had figures like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene warning Republicans could lose the House if people are still continuing to go paycheck to paycheck.
So they recognize the danger, but they can't seem to shake the connection people are making between the tariffs and their wallets.
It looks that way. It's an affordability issue that people are tying back to a specific policy. And, this has real strategic implications. Look at Virginia's gubernatorial results.
What happened there?
Well, yeah, most counties stayed red on the map, but compared to the 2024 presidential election, every single county in Virginia shifted at least a little bit towards the Democrats.
Every county. Even the deep red ones.
Every single one. Which tells you something important about campaign strategy.
Which is?
That campaigning hard everywhere matters. Even in those red areas, you won't win. It's about, closing the gap.
So losing by less is actually a win.
In a way, yes. Losing a red county by 10,000 fewer votes is just as valuable statewide as winning 10,000 more votes in a blue county you already hold. It's about margin compression.
So the takeaway is show up, campaign on affordability, hammer the tariff connection, even in hostile territory.
That seems to be the lesson from Virginia, yeah.
Yeah.
Just showing up and making the case can shave off crucial votes, even if you don't flip the county.
That's a powerful insight. Okay, speaking of tariffs and policy, let's pivot to the courts. Because it sounds like the Supreme Court might be about to take away a major tool related to those tariffs.
Yeah, this is a really big one. We're talking about learning resources, Inc. v. Trump.
Tell us about that. What's the core issue?
So the background is, the Trump administration imposed all these huge tariffs using executive orders. They claimed it was an emergency situation.
Right, I remember that. They were pretty sweeping.
Oh, completely. The sources even pointed out, kind of absurdly, that they slapped tariffs on imports from Hurt Island, which is, uninhabited. A UNESCO site, just to show the power was supposedly unlimited.
Okay, but isn't levying tariffs basically taxes Congress's job according to the Constitution? Article 1, right?
That's the whole point. Article I gives Congress the power of the purse, including tariffs. So Administration had to find a way around that.
How'd they try?
They argued Congress actually gave them that power indirectly through a law from 1977. It's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA.
IEPA. Okay. And what does that law say?
It lets the president regulate the importation or exportation of goods during a declared national emergency. So the whole case kind of hangs on that word, regulate.
Does regulate mean you can just impose massive taxes? That seems like a stretch.
Well, that's exactly what the justices seem to think. They sounded pretty skeptical during the arguments.
Especially now, right? They just overturned that Chevron standard about deferring to agencies.
Precisely. They're pushing back on agencies reading broad powers into vague laws. The justices basically asked, how could Congress just hand over its core taxing power without saying so very, very clearly?
Did the administration have a counter to that?
They tried. The Solicitor General argued these weren't taxes, they were regulatory tariffs. The goal wasn't revenue, supposedly, it was negotiation leverage.
Did that fly? Especially when Trump himself said the tariffs were helping the deficit.
Yeah, Chief Justice Roberts jumped right on that. If they're reducing the deficit, that sounds a lot like revenue, which sounds a lot like a tax. The regulatory tariff argument seemed pretty thin.
So the court was dubious. What about the precedent? Were they worried about future presidents using this?
Oh, absolutely. That was a huge part of the discussion. They posed this really pointed hypothetical.
What was it?
They asked, okay, if we say the president can do this under IEPA for a trade emergency, what stops a future Democratic president from declaring climate change a national emergency?
Uh-oh.
And then slapping massive regulatory tariffs on all imported gas-powered cars?
Wow. And what did the administration's lawyer say?
He basically had to concede that, yes, under their reading of the law, that would be possible.
That probably didn't help their case much.
Probably not.
Oh.
It runs right into this thing called the major questions doctrine.
Remind us what that is again. It's relatively new, right?
Yeah, from 2022. It basically says that for really big, politically or economically significant regulations, the administration needs clear authorization from Congress, not just some vague word like regulate in an old law.
And EPA doesn't have that clear authorization for tariffs.
Not according to the sources analyzing the arguments, no. It just says regulate. It doesn't say impose unlimited taxes via tariffs.
So what's the likely outcome here? And when?
Most observers think the administration is likely to lose this one, based on the justices' skepticism, maybe apart from Thomas and Alito. And because the case was fast-tracked, we should get a decision pretty soon, maybe before the end of the term.
And if Trump loses, what's the impact?
It'd be a huge blow, frankly. It takes away his main tool for trying to shape international trade deals through unilateral action. It forces any future tariff policy back through Congress.
Okay, so a potential major check on executive power coming from the courts. That takes us nicely into our last segment. The mechanics of the next fight. How the parties are setting up the battlefield for 2026.
Right. While the court might limit current power, the parties are already deep in the trenches, fighting over maps, candidates, and even the basic infrastructure of elections.
Let's start with the maps, the redistricting race. Where's the action happening?
Well, California and Virginia are both redrawing congressional maps right now. The estimates we saw suggest that could potentially net Democrats maybe 8 seats combined if things break their way.
8 seats is significant. Any specific examples of these map fights?
Yeah, look at Maryland. You've got the Democratic governor, Wes Moore, pushing for a new map specifically designed to target the state's lone Republican Congressman, Andy Harris.
His district is what, R+8? Pretty Republican?
R+8, yeah. It's MD-01. But Maryland already has some incredibly gerrymandered districts, like MD-03, which snakes all over the place. The problem for Moore is that the Republican voters in Harris's district are really concentrated geographically deep on the Delmarva Peninsula.
So it's hard to draw them out.
Exactly. You can try to make it maybe R+3 or R+4, which is competitive, but it's tough to guarantee a flip when the voters are packed together like that. It shows how hard it is to undo geographic sorting through map drawing alone.
Okay, so that's a tough one for Democrats. What about elsewhere? Any wins for less gerrymandered maps?
Actually, yes. Out in Utah, a state judge there just threw out the state's congressional map.
Why? What was wrong with it?
It was a classic crack. It took Salt Lake County, which is heavily Democratic, like 1.2 million people, and split it up between all 4 of Utah's congressional districts.
Ah, so diluting the Democratic vote to make sure none of the districts were competitive.
Precisely. The judge tossed it out, and the new court-ordered map creates an R+6 district centered more logically on Salt Lake City.
R+6.
Yet,
Still leans Republican, but winnable for a Democrat.
at least conceivable, as one source put it. Not easy, but possible. They have potential candidates, like Ben McAdams, who held a seat before, or even Caroline Gleich. She's a professional skier who climbed Everest.
An uphill climb, then. Apt.
You could say that. But just as Dems get a shot in Utah, they've taken a hit somewhere else. Maine.
Right. Representative Jared Golden is retiring.
Yeah, he's a moderate Blue Dog Democrat in a rural district, ME01, that leans Republican R+4. He managed to hold it, but now that he's leaving, it's going to be really tough for Democrats to keep that seat.
Which probably reinforces the idea within the party that they need moderates in these swing districts.
It leads right into the next point.
Huh.
Primary interference. The head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, Representative Susan Delban,
From Washington State, yeah.
she's explicitly saying she plans to meddle in Democratic primaries in these crucial swing districts.
Meddle. That sounds controversial within the party. Why do it?
Her stated goal is pretty blunt. Make sure the strongest possible general election candidate wins the primary. And in her view, that almost always means a moderate, somebody like Abigail Spanberger.
Not a progressive, like Zoran Mamdani.
Exactly. She calls them Spanberger clones versus Mamdani clones. The strategy is clear. In districts, Democrats absolutely need to win for a majority. They want the candidate perceived as having the broadest appeal.
Will she interfere everywhere?
No, she drew a line. She said she won't get involved in safe blue districts, like D+10 or more. But in the toss-ups, the swing seats, progressives are basically being told, maybe sit this one out if you think you can't win the general. The priority is majority, full stop.
Okay. Maps, candidates. What about the actual plumbing of the elections? The infrastructure? There was some concerning news there.
Yeah, this is really worrying. Federal agencies, specifically CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, are apparently pulling back from helping state and local governments with election security.
Why is that a problem? Don't states run their own elections?
They do, but many local election offices have tiny budgets, like almost no money, and certainly no cybersecurity experts on staff. They relied on federal help for threat assessment, monitoring physical security advice.
And that help is going away. What specific cuts are happening?
The cuts sound pretty drastic. The CISA Election Monitoring Room, which was like a central hub, is being closed. There was something called the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, EISAC, which gave real-time threat info to local officials.
Yeah.
Funding zeroed out, gone. And get this. The CISA staff who actually monitored election equipment for vulnerabilities laid off.
Laid off. So who is doing the monitoring?
Well, instead of monitoring the machines, CISA apparently sent monitors to California and New Jersey to observe voters.
Observe voters, not the voting machines or the networks. That's a huge shift in focus.
It's a massive shift away from infrastructure defense towards something else entirely, and it leaves a huge gap.
Who fills that gap if the feds aren't helping and local offices can't afford it?
That's the million-dollar question. Effectively, maybe no one is watching the perimeter as closely. And this is where the foreign interference risk comes back in, connecting, weirdly, to the tariff stuff we discussed. The sources pointed out that foreign adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, whoever, they don't necessarily root for Republican or Democrat. They root for their interests.
Right. Predictability, maybe? Or getting rid of someone seen as erratic.
Exactly. If a foreign power sees the current U.S. leadership as, say, unpredictable on trade, or maybe careless with nuclear policy, they might want regime change regardless of party. And a suddenly weakened, unmonitored election infrastructure, that looks like a pretty tempting target if you want to sow chaos or influence the outcome.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot we've covered. Let's try to pull it together.
We hit 3 main areas, right? First, the economy is still king in messaging, and the blame for high prices seems to be landing on Trump's tariffs.
Second, the Supreme Court seems poised to significantly limit the president's power to impose those tariffs unilaterally, potentially reasserting Congress's authority.
And third, The parties are already fighting tooth and nail over the future battlefield redrawing maps, trying to control who gets nominated in key districts. And worryingly, the federal government seems to be stepping back from securing the actual election infrastructure itself.
Which brings us to that final provocative thought. We heard the Supreme Court justices questioning the emergency tariff power by asking, could a president use this for climate change?
Yeah, that hypothetical about taxing gas-guzzling cars.
So if the court does rule against the administration here, using the major questions doctrine to say, no, you need clear congressional approval for big economic actions under an emergency, does that signal a broader shift? Could the court become equally skeptical of any claimed national emergency, maybe related to election security, or something else entirely if a president tries to use it to bypass Congress for major policy changes?
That's a really interesting question. If they're saying major questions require clear statutes for economic emergencies, why wouldn't that apply to other types of declared emergencies where a president tries to act alone on something huge?
It could mean the court is really trying to force power back to the legislative branch across the board, pulling back on decades of growing executive authority.
It might fundamentally change the playbook for how presidents respond to crises, forcing them to work with Congress rather than around it. Definitely something to watch.
Something for you to mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the source material.
See you next time.